Thank you for joining us on this live Sunday edition. All right, I want to calmly now walk through the situation in Egypt, but on the subject of the internet shutdown that began Friday morning Egypt time and has been almost complete. Egypt shut down, worst in internet history, experts report. This out of the AFP. Here's AOL saying internet kill switch. Should the United States emulate Egypt? You got to love how they just push incredible tyranny like it's a good thing in our media. And the federal government is setting up a kill switch over the internet. New bill gives Obama kill switch to shut down the internet. That's another headline. Here's another headline out of the Sydney Morning Herald. Obama internet kill switch bill approved. As it moves forward, here's another one. CNBC host Aaron Burnett implies America should support foreign dictators to keep flow of cheap oil. They always love to sell us that tyranny's good. Here's MSNBC. So how do you shut off a whole nation's internet? MIT experts say it depends on ISP ownership and doubt it could happen in the U.S. unless they pass the Cybersecurity Act, where all the ISPs have a piece of government equipment in their chain by law, and the internet has to be basically redesigned to follow that edict. That's what's in the Cybersecurity Act. That's the internet shut-off switch. That's these giant NSA snooping bases they're building with our taxpayer dollars everywhere. All right, so I'm done talking about that. Let me get into the big news here. As this started throughout the week, I had a lot of listeners calling in saying, oh, I bet it's George Soros. I bet it's our government overthrowing another country. Because the CIA admits they've overthrown well over 100 countries in the last 65 years since they've been around. And before that, the OSS. And a lot of times they do it to democracies, they do it to tyrannies, they do it to dictatorships, they do it to leftist regimes, right-wing regimes. If the dictator doesn't just basically sign their entire country over to the globalist, doesn't accept their entire agenda, then they're overthrown. And a lot of times, even though they serve them, they're overthrown. Saddam Hussein put into power in the early 1970s. The U.S. government basically funded the Iraqi government to make him the head of Ba'athist security. He then overthrew the Ba'athists in 79, became the full dictator. U.S. government gave him over $30 billion on record and said, go ahead and attack Iran. The CIA was there as advisors on the ground. U.S. satellite images were given to him. And then he said, I'm going to invade Kuwait. They're stealing my oil in 1990. And April Gillespie, the U.S. ambassador, said, go ahead. We're not going to get involved. Just like they basically wink-winked for him with Iran. Then they basically invaded, wrecked the country, put it under sanctions. Over 1 million Iraqis died. Then they invaded again in 2003, lied about WMDs. I mean, this is the history of what happened. And it's declassified that Saddam Hussein in 1948 was hired by the CIA for 2 years, trained in Cairo, Egypt, on how to commit assassinations, and then later, of course, brought to power by our government. But this is not our government. This is the private intelligence agency of the big private central banks represented by the Davos, Switzerland group, the Bilderberg group. These are the major meeting houses and confabs where they openly want world government run by private corporate interest that remove your Bill of Rights, your Constitution, your sovereignty, and then bring in a paramilitary police state grid so they can carry out their policies against you. Now, Hosni Mubarak in power for 30 years, a dictator for 29, but really in power technically for 31. He gets $13 billion plus every year of U.S. taxpayer money. A lot of the U.S. torture centers are there, the ghost sites, the black sites. He's been the angel of Israel, the angel of the United States. He's done everything they want, brutally murdering people, torturing, pure death, just absolutely barbarous to the huge population of Egypt. Then you've got the Arab Brotherhood, going back to British intelligence, and then after they lost control of the Middle East during World War II under Hitler, and then under CIA control after that. This is not even my opinion. I mean, you know, we reserve judgment until Friday night on this, but we did have guests on who said this could be the case, where they're flushing another one of their minions down the toilet. Hosni Mubarak, to put on and to put into power Mohammed el-Baradei, who they admit is a United Nations George Soros minion, who's the former head of the IAEA at the UN, the Nuclear Weapons Regulatory Group. And I've got the whole breakdown on him. Director General, the International Atomic Energy Agency, New York Law School, CIA trained. I mean, his whole background is public. And he shows back up the week before all this starts in Egypt and starts going around saying, I'm ready to be your leader. And it turns out the Egyptian military is bought and paid for by the U.S. and Israel. This is on record. And is basically standing down, unless they try to burn some of the museums, are standing down while the people run around and loot. And here's the London Telegraph. Egypt protest. America's secret backing for rebel leaders behind uprising. It continues. Egyptian opposition leader calls on Mubarak to leave today. And who is that? This is the new puppet, the UN puppet. Because there's one thing Mubarak hadn't done. He refuses to force sterilize people, and they've had UN population summits. He's been criticized. He refuses to sterilize and bring an abortion. Now, you better believe that el-Baradei will. So Mubarak loves to torture, kill, slaughter, total dictator. Our government's got its torture sites there, loves him, but he isn't good enough. He isn't good enough. He doesn't hate his people enough. And so Mohammed el-Baradei, the Pied Piper of Egyptian revolt, Paul Joseph Watson, that's from Friday, his report up there. And, of course, on Friday he also reported on the George Soros connection. But now Axelrod's bragging that el-Baradei is their man. We've got another report by the LRC blog, Egypt's Rose Revolution, similar to what happened in Georgia. There's another report here. Egypt is another Soros color revolution. Soros, of course, funded rebellions and takeovers all over Eastern Europe and into Central Asia on the belly of Russia. And it's just hard to believe until you look at the evidence and that it's just admitted that our government is so illegitimate. But you can learn a lot from what's happened with this situation. And you can see what's going to happen here in the U.S. Remember, a few years ago, I told you that Google is an NSA front. That's now been mainstream news in the Associated Press in the last few weeks, that it basically is the NSA. It's not part of it. It is the NSA. It is NSA software, keyword software. That's how they listen to your phones and read your faxes and your email is a keyword search. They grab all the data of the, quote, internet, but your private faxes, emails, phone calls are recorded, put in a database, and then they run a Google search on it. It's called Echelon. Been around for 30 years at least. That's what Google is. But it's worse. In fact, I'll print this during the break and go back over it. Google admits they can now predict the future to a great extent. So they know when there's about to be a real rebellion in Egypt, they just activate their takeover, see? That way they can ride the wave. That's what's hard to beat about the New World Order. They've got artificial intelligence. All right, we're back live, my friends. I want to lay out the geopolitical strategy of the globalists and their social engineers very simply, because I usually spend my time getting into fine nuances of it, but to give you a general summation. The private global banking cartel has conservatively created 1.5 quadrillion in derivatives. It is a debt black hole, hundreds of times bigger than all the real wealth in the world. Even the Washington Post admits this. They buy off your governments with the made-up fiat currency. They need police state systems in place to make sure that the population never gets control of their nation again. Their political creation is the UN that poses as a humanitarian organization, but in its own annals admits it is a eugenics population reduction program designed to keep the third world from developing. Because if the third world ever developed and developed sophisticated weapon systems, technological systems, they would be sophisticated enough not to be overtaken by the globalist and kept in debt, servitude, and bondage. Now, separately, and you see this in the news all the time, the post-industrial world, getting rid of our industrial base, getting back to nature. The stated goal of the UN, Club of Rome, Council on Foreign Relations, is to deindustrialize the West and to destroy the middle class. The ultra-rich call this the final revolution. They don't want you doing financially well. They don't want you being self-sufficient. This is the stated enemy. They want you controlled, working for a Fortune 100 corporation at near the poverty line, so that you're so busy just trying to survive, you can never challenge the monopoly of power of the world's ruling class. There is a continuity of agenda from Australia to the United States, from Chile to Canada, from Japan to South Africa. The same programs, the same international organizations, the same standardization. And when you get into the white papers of these people, they openly say we're going to have a Singaporean model globally. And they go on to admit the communist Chinese model is a Singaporean model. And if you want to know what life is going to be like, and I've made a big deal out of this because I happened to pick up a year-old copy a month or two ago of December 2010, January 2010, National Geographic. And it said right there, Singapore is great, tyranny's great, this is what our government wants to do. Their population is at a 1.2 replacement rate. That means they're dying. For every 2 adults, they have 1.2 children. They have no free speech. They're totally enslaved. And the article says this is the model to go with. So they're just out in the open pushing this. Now, what does that have to do with Egypt? The globalists put Hosni Mubarak in. For 30 years, he's ruled with an iron fist. The majority of the U.S.-run black site torture centers, where they even take U.S. citizens to have their teeth ripped out, to be put on the rack, to have their heart stopped with drugs, to have their kids raped in front of them. That's in the Army's own reports, the General Tagumba report. I mean, you talk about hell on earth, building the army of darkness. Our government, which isn't our government, it's a hijacker. It's the corporate, globalist, social Darwin hijacker. The eugenicist hijackers have turned Egypt into a fortress of pure evil. Now, continuing, they are able, with their actuaries, with their computer systems. In fact, Jaron, did I print that article about Google being able to predict the future now? Oh, it's right in front of me. It'd bite me if it was a snake. When I talked earlier before the break about globalist modeling and globalist operations, what they're doing is a 21st century mode of what the British Great Game was. If you don't know what the British Great Game is, you can just look it up in an encyclopedia. Basically, the British would play different powers off against each other. They would divide and conquer. How this little bitty island with a small population dominate more than half the known world, to where the sun never set on the British Empire. And they're taking that system and using NSA predictive systems where when they track enough cell phone users, enough internet users, enough of your daily habits, they know how to predict what you're going to do individually every day by tracking your iPhone or your Droid, and they have those in Egypt, at about 99% accuracy. The government knows who you're going to call next with 93% accuracy. This is their admissions, because they see patterns in what you do that you don't consciously see. You know, a lot of people, when they join a government agency or something, are given these thousands of questions, psychological exams, trying to find out really, truly who you are or if you're deceptive. Well, imagine what they know off what you watch on TiVo, tracking what you watch, when you flip the channel, what you surf on the internet, where you go, what you do, where you pull in and eat, what you Google, What's you, Yahoo?